Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a bit of discussion on some of the Week 5 matchups in college football. So basically, the format of this is I'm going to go over and just kind of briefly touch on a bunch of different matchups, and I'm going to more so highlight the matchups where I think a particular team has good betting value. So I'm going to start with Thursday and Friday, and I'm going to do both games for those days and just talk about them a little bit. And then I'm going to go to Saturday and maybe cover about 20% of the games on Saturday. Covering every single one of them would make this video too long, and I'm pretty much just going to highlight some of the games where I think that one team has solid betting value over the other. But just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I've written sports betting picks for the last 8 years professionally, and the main sports that I focus on are college football and college basketball, but I've also handicapped for the NFL, NBA, and MLB. And a site that I highly recommend is called stumpthespread.com, and I'll link to their website in the description. You can get free and premium pick content there, and they're just one of the more transparent handicapping sites that I've been a part of, so just thought I'd mention that. But anyways, getting into the meat of this video, we'll start with the Thursday matchups, and we have Kansas versus Texas Tech. Texas Tech comes in as significant favorites. The Red Raiders, their offense is obviously extremely potent. They're one of the leading passing offenses and scoring offenses in the nation, and this is a really bad matchup for Kansas because the Jayhawks defense is pretty bad and they just haven't been looking strong so far this season. The only hesitation I really would have on taking Texas Tech in this one is their defense has been really bad, but against an opponent like Kansas, they should have a little bit more success than they've had in the past. So if I were to take this game, I would side with Texas Tech, but it is a lot of points to give, and generally I try to stay away from taking huge favorites, but Texas Tech seems to have okay value in this game. All right, going down to Connecticut and Houston, another huge favorite situation. I'm not as high on Connecticut as a lot of people were coming into the year, and that's kind of been playing out. They haven't been all that impressive. Houston, on the other hand, they have looked very strong, and they've consistently been blowing out lesser opponents. The only holdup I have with Houston is Greg Ward Jr. is dealing with some shoulder issues. When he throws, he feels pain in his shoulder, which is something to watch out for Houston going forward. But even with just pounding the ball on the ground, they should be able to get a pretty significant lead against Connecticut. Both of these games, not the greatest betting value on the board this week, but I would side with the favorite in each instance. All right, going to Friday's games, we have Toledo and BYU. I really like both these teams. Even though BYU has taken a number of losses this year, they've been competitive in every game, and they've gone against a really brutally tough schedule. But I also really like this Toledo squad. Toledo might be a bit more fresh coming into this matchup because they haven't gone against the same kind of grind that BYU has. I think this is going to be a really competitive game, and I actually wouldn't be surprised if Toledo came out on top, but I don't have a strong feeling really either way with this particular spread. If I had to pick it, I'd take Toledo, but this is a pretty fair spread, so not the best value. Oh, all right, so the website just updated there. All right, going down to Stanford and Washington. Washington, obviously, a lot of hype coming into the year. They've lived up to it for the most part. They have gone against a fairly easy schedule, though, which has helped them. And Washington, they kind of struggled on the road against Arizona last week, and Arizona's probably a mid to lower tier Pac-12 team this year. I think one of the main reasons Washington had issue last week was dealing with a dual threat quarterback that really kind of threw them off, and fortunately for the Huskies, they won't have to deal with that against Stanford. This is probably going to be a really low-scoring game, and I think the home field advantage is really going to boost Washington in this one. And Stanford, they've played well this year, no doubt about that, against a tough schedule, but the Cardinals have also been beaten up a little bit more going against tougher competition, which is also something to keep in mind. But I don't love this game either by any means, but if I had to pick a side, I would side with the home team in this one to get over the top. Also, Washington's trying to prove themselves in this one, and this is a really important game for them as a team, so they definitely won't be taking this one lightly. All right, so now we're going to move down to the Saturday games, and on the side here I kind of have a list of the games that I want to just touch on. Starting with Notre Dame Syracuse. Notre Dame clearly came into the year way overvalued. They even lost to Duke last week as huge favorites. Until they can prove themselves, I just don't understand how they can be giving so many points on the road. Syracuse's defense obviously really weak, but their offense has shown some really nice signs. I really like the direction this program is going under their new head coach. I really like what I've seen in certain instances with their up-tempo offense. And for Syracuse to cover a spread like this against Notre Dame, they're probably going to have to put up probably between 20 and 30 points, and I think that they can do that against this Irish defense. You can already see that it started at -14, and right now it's down to -12.5. Syracuse also picked up a big win for their confidence last week on the road against UConn, so they got some momentum coming to this matchup, so that is definitely one of the value picks that I see here today. All right, another game, South Florida Cincinnati. Cincinnati's kind of been a tough team to figure out so far this year. They've played in competitive matches against teams that they should have blown out, and they kind of actually held with Houston for a while before getting blown out in that particular matchup. But they've just been shuffling in different quarterbacks, and to not have your quarterback kind of locked down at this point in the year isn't the greatest situation to be in. South Florida, I really like South Florida coming into the year. They've looked really impressive, but last week they kind of got outclassed by Florida State, which isn't, a black eye necessarily for South Florida. They were able to at least show some pride and kind of, get back into the game a little bit there at the end and put up 35 points on Florida State. But I just really like this Florida State offense. They're really dynamic, and if you can get it at -4, I really think that that's a pretty decent value bet for South Florida in this matchup. All right, and then SMU and Temple. So Temple obviously hasn't lived up to their expectations so far coming into the year, but this is definitely a matchup where the Owls should be able to take care of business. They have their star running back, Jihad Thomas, back, which is a big boost to Temple, and the big knock here on SMU is Matt Davis being out for the year. I'm a big Matt Davis fan. He's the leader of this team, but with him out, this just isn't the same threat coming from SMU. So with their backup quarterback in, and going on the road to Temple, I think that the Owls are a pretty decent bet here to cover. All right, scrolling down, let's get to Western and Central Michigan. This is a really great rivalry game, and both of these teams have looked pretty strong to start the year. We really liked Western Michigan to win the MAC coming into the year, and this squad has not disappointed. They have 2 Big Ten road wins already under their belt, and then last week the Broncos were able to get past a pretty talented Georgia Southern squad, and Georgia Southern actually blew Western Michigan out last year, so a really big win for the Broncos to come back and get that win against the Eagles. Central Michigan, we're not quite as high on them. They got obviously really lucky in their Oklahoma State game. That should have been a loss. It was a officiating error at the end, and then obviously the incredible Hail Mary to get that win. But Central Michigan's defense really struggled last week against a Virginia team that we don't have that much confidence in, and Virginia really hadn't been playing that great up to their contest against the Chippewas. It could be that CMU was looking ahead to their rivalry game against Western, but you really can't overlook a Power 5 opponent on the road when you're a MAC school. And their defense just got throttled, which is not a great sign coming into this matchup against Western, who has a really strong offensive unit. So in this one, I'm definitely liking the Broncos to win and cover. I'd be surprised if they weren't able to get the victory, even on the road. All right, scrolling down here, let's touch on the Miami-Georgia Tech game. We kind of expected Georgia Tech to bounce back a bit this year based on the really disappointing 2015 campaign. Georgia Tech has looked all right at times so far this year, like in their blowout win over Vanderbilt, but We really did not like what we saw from the Yellow Jackets last week against Clemson. They just couldn't get anything going with their triple option attack. And even though Florida might not have quite the defense that Clemson does, they do have a pretty strong defense. And we just also like the direction that this Miami team is heading under their new coaching staff. And also that Miami win on the road against Appalachian State was extremely impressive. So we like Miami to get the job done here and even to cover this moderate spread. If it gets over a touchdown, though, I would really hesitate. But under a touchdown, I still think Miami has a pretty decent betting value in this one. All right, now to talk about Wisconsin and Michigan. This is going to be a pretty interesting game. Wisconsin's been a really weird team this year. They kind of do the opposite of what everyone thinks. So like in week 1 against LSU, they picked up the upset win. And then they really struggled and almost lost at home to Georgia State a couple weeks back, which was just a really bad showing for the Badgers. But last week they go on the road and dominate Michigan State on the road, which was another really surprising result. Great win for Wisconsin, but now they have to go on the road yet again. And going back-to-back on the road against really physical opponents is just never easy, and that kind of tilts things in the favor of Michigan. You see that it's already gone from -9 to -10.5. Michigan has yet to leave home, and they've gone against a pretty manageable schedule thus far. They're a lot fresher at this point than Wisconsin as a result, and this is a really important game for Michigan to prove that they're worth the rating that they currently have. They've gone against a pretty manageable slate, but they've also dominated for the most part, and we really like what we're seeing out of this Michigan squad right now, especially just in terms of their physical play, and they're gaining confidence on both sides of the ball. We just like Michigan to pull away in this one. It could potentially be a lower scoring game, which could make it tough to cover a spread like this, but we still think that Michigan has a pretty decent betting value here. All right, moving down to Clemson and Louisville. This is one of the probably the most compelling matchup of this week. We were big on Louisville coming into the year, and they have even surpassed our expectations. That blowout win at home against Florida was absolutely tremendous. We love Lamar Jackson and what he's been able to do. Louisville has been a consistent, dominant performer on the offensive side of the ball, and even against this Clemson defense, we still expect Louisville to put up some pretty good offensive numbers in this matchup. Clemson, on the other hand, they came into the year with a lot of hype, and they haven't quite lived up to that hype, even though they remain undefeated. This is going to be a true measuring stick game to see if Clemson is as good as people were expecting coming into the year. But at this point right now, based on what we've been seeing out of both of these teams, we like Louisville, and you can see that it's already gone from -3 to Louisville being favored. If this gets maybe to a field goal, then I wouldn't be quite as high on Louisville, but at basically a pick-em, we like the Cardinals even in the road environment in this one. All right, moving down to North Carolina and Florida State. Florida State has been kind of an interesting team so far this year. They got that nice win, come from behind win against Ole Miss. And then last week they really dominated a pretty decent South Florida squad until the second half when the Bulls were able to get back in it a little bit. And then North Carolina, obviously that disappointing loss against Georgia in week 1, but we're big fans of this North Carolina offense. North Carolina played pretty sloppy last week at home against Pittsburgh, but they were still able to find a way in the end to pull out the win. If North Carolina plays sloppy this week on the road against Florida State, they obviously don't have a chance, but if they just clean up some of their mistakes, we definitely like their offense to keep them competitive against Florida State, especially from what we've seen from the Seminoles defense. The Seminoles defense has shown that they're not as good as they've been in the past or even what they were hyped to be coming into the year. Obviously, their performance against Louisville was really awful. But just based on what we've seen from this North Carolina offense, we like them to at least stay competitive in this matchup, and getting this many points seems like a pretty decent value bet. All right, moving down to Navy and Air Force. We liked both these teams coming into the year. Navy, we've kind of decreased how much we like them because of Tago Smith, their starting quarterback, going out. But in a triple option offense, you usually have those backup quarterbacks that you need, even though they might not be quite as good as Tago Smith. They're still halfway decent. But going on the road to Air Force didn't look nearly as strong last week as we were expecting against Utah State, but some fortunate calls went the Falcons' way, which probably ended up making the difference in their 7-point road win against the Aggies. That was still a good win for Air Force. And going against a Navy defense this week that isn't quite to the level that we think that Utah State's defense is, we expect the Falcons to get their ground game running a little bit smoother than they found last week. And just giving the one touchdown, we feel like Air Force has pretty decent value in this one. This one started at -10, but now that we're down to a touchdown, Air Force feels like a pretty good value play. All right, moving down to Kentucky and Alabama. Kentucky's been kind of an interesting team to follow so far this year. Some games, their offenses looked really great and their defense has been gashed. But then, like last week, we get the offense kind of competing at a more moderate level, and the defense really stepped up at home against South Carolina. But anyways, that was a good conference win for Kentucky nonetheless, and a good confidence builder. Having Drew Barker out isn't the worst thing. Kentucky has a pretty decent other option at quarterback. Even though Alabama is definitely deserving of their number one ranking, 35 points just seems like an awful lot of points to give in a conference game. So, for instance, Kentucky probably only needs to score about 14, so 2 touchdowns, to have a really tremendous shot at covering a spread of this size. If they scored 14, Alabama would have to score 50 to cover this spread. So we like the Kentucky ground game, and we'd wish they'd feature it more often. Kentucky has some pretty decent running backs, and if they're running the ball and Alabama's running the ball, that'll also run the clock down more, which will make it tougher to score enough. As long as Kentucky doesn't give over too many touchdowns from things like special teams or turning the ball over on offense, and Alabama's defense getting points, we think they have a pretty good shot at covering a spread of this magnitude. All right. Oregon State, they put up a decent fight in the second half last week against Boise State, but their first half obviously wasn't great. If Darryl Garrettson is in the game, that'll obviously boost the Beavers' chances here. Obviously, they're big underdogs coming into this one. Colorado, this is their coming out year, it seems, but having the injury concerns with Cephalufau is something to keep in mind. This is a lot of points, and Colorado is coming off a really emotional win on the road against Oregon. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Beavers keep things competitive in this one, and this is just a lot of points for two teams that, I mean, clearly Colorado is the better team, but it just seems a little excessive to be giving this many points. So we like the Beavers in this one. All right, so let's see. Next one is going to be Arizona UCLA. UCLA had every opportunity in the world to close out Stanford last week, and they just weren't able to do it. And then in some of the final phases of the game, they really fell apart to get that loss. Really disappointing because we took UCLA with the points last week, and then the final play of the game, they give up a defensive touchdown to Stanford, which made it so that they couldn't cover. That was really disappointing. But anyways, we still like this UCLA squad. They do have 2 losses against quality opposition this year, but against the mid-tier and lower-tier Pac-12 teams, we expect them to take care of business. Arizona, they're, a mid to lower-tier Pac-12 team. Nick Wilson being in or out isn't going to be too much of a big deal for Arizona because they have some decent depth at running back. And then the thing that I don't really like about Arizona at this point in the year is their quarterback situation. They've kind of been shuffling between Solomon and Dawkins, and not having your QB kind of locked in at this point in the year isn't a great situation to be in. And then another thing that I'm really hesitant about with Arizona is they're just not very physical in the trenches. Their defensive line isn't great. UCLA should be able to get their run game going. And then also protecting their quarterback has been an issue, and I think UCLA will be able to get after who's ever under center. So we like UCLA to cover the spread as a pretty decent value bet. All right, moving down to Michigan State, Indiana. So Indiana is coming off a really bad loss. They should have been able to take care of business last week at home against Wake Forest. Perhaps they were looking ahead to this matchup, but that's really no excuse. If Indiana would have picked up that win, they would be heading into conference play undefeated, but that is not something they were able to accomplish. This Indiana team, they've been playing pretty competitive games so far this year in the non-conference against not the greatest opposition, which isn't the greatest sign. And then Michigan State, they've been kind of an interesting team. They struggled in their first matchup against an FCS opponent at home, which was surprising. And then they go on the road and kind of throttle Notre Dame for a good portion of things until the end, where Notre Dame was able to make things a little more competitive. But then Michigan State really dropped the ball last week at home against Wisconsin. And we think coming off that loss, it's really going to motivate the Spartans to come out and show that they're better than the 24-point defeat that they showed against Wisconsin last week. And this Indiana defense obviously isn't to the same level that that Wisconsin defense is at. And even though it's probably not the greatest bet on the board, we do like Michigan State to cover with it being at a touchdown. If it's over a touchdown, I'd probably avoid it though. And initially this game started at -7, so you can already see that people are doubting Michigan State. It seems like when people start doubting Michigan State, that's when they turn things around and actually show up. All right, we just got a couple more games that I've written down here. So Utah State and Boise State. So I watched the Air Force Utah State game last week, and I was really impressed with what the Aggies were able to do, especially in the second half against the Air Force triple option run game. That was just really impressive. And if it wasn't for some blatantly poor calls that went against the Aggies, they probably would have been able to pick up the win. I think they outplayed Air Force last week, but they still came up short in the end. They were really able to get their passing game going, which is a good sign for the Aggies going forward. And if Kent Myers is continuing to progress in the pass game to pair with his ability to run the ball and be a threat on the ground, that's going to be good for Utah State going forward. I don't expect them to pick up the upset here against Boise State, but if they're able to have the same kind of success that they had in the pass game last week and stop the Boise State run attack like they were able to stop Air Force's ground game, that should give them enough to at least stay competitive. We really like Boise State too this year, but you know, like in their home game against Washington State, they were huge favorites coming to that one, and they had a tough time. And then last week on the road against Oregon State, they were able to pick up a big lead, much like they were able to do against Washington State, and then it kind of faded. So they've kind of been looking like a first-half team and then fading down the stretch, and that can be really hurt your heart, especially when giving this many points in the second half. So at the very least, Utah State should have a shot at the backdoor cover in the end. So we like Utah State getting this many points, and if you can get the 3 touchdowns, that would be ideal in this situation. And then one more game to cover here. I'm going to talk about Nevada and Hawaii. So obviously Hawaii, a team that travels all over the place, and they've really done a lot of travel this year, which can really wear on a team. But they've had a week off, which should allow them to get a bit refreshed coming into this matchup. And then, interestingly, Nevada has actually traveled quite a bit as well. They've gone recently on the road to Notre Dame, and also last week, or in their last matchup against Purdue. And then they go from that matchup on the road against Purdue all the way out to Hawaii for another road game. So definitely a tough road traveling situation for Nevada. And Hawaii is just a really tough place to play. There's a lot of distractions, and just the travel and the time zone difference can be a factor. But we like Hawaii to keep things competitive in this one. We're not very high on Nevada. At this point, they're more of a mid-tier Mountain West team, and we would not be surprised to see Hawaii push the Wolfpack and get the upset in this one. It's already gone from Nevada -6 to -4.5, and I strongly believe that's because of Nevada's less than stellar performance in their last outing and a losing effort against Purdue. So this is another one where we like the home team here to come through, and especially getting the points. So, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them win straight up. All right, guys, so we probably worked our way through maybe about 15 to 20 games, and I just kind of gave you my thoughts on what I feel some of the better bets might be this coming Saturday. It's still pretty early in the week, and these odds can change. This was my first video and what I hope to be a pretty consistent series of videos, probably every week I'll put out a video. So basically what my schedule looks like is I write matchup analysis articles for every single game starting like Saturday night into Sunday, and then I work all the way through Monday, and it's usually about 50 to 60 articles. So, I mean, when I'm going through these matchups, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. And whenever I finish writing all my articles for the week, I'll try to make one of these videos because then everything is pretty fresh on my mind. If I waited a day or two, I might forget some of the information that I was writing down. But yeah, I had fun talking through some of these matchups, and for more of these types of videos in the future, I definitely recommend you to subscribe. Once college basketball season starts, that's definitely the best sport that I've capped historically in terms of winning percentage. I'll probably release those videos, if not every day, semi-daily for the best college basketball matchups, but we still got some time. That's going to be over in November, so I'll just be throwing these college football videos up on a weekly basis, and then once college basketball comes around, we'll be getting quite a bit more videos. I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but I recommend checking out stumpthespread.com. They're really transparent with their capping, and I've really enjoyed working for them over the years. I'll put a link to their website in the description. You can get free and premium pick content there. But anyways, thanks guys for watching. Subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in next week's video. Thanks.